everything leaves a signal.
What's the one thing you still won't delegate because deep down, you know you're the best at it? Hello, hello, everyone, to yet another episode of Middle Manager Mastery with your host, me, Shruti Rustagi. Now, today, my guest on the podcast is a marketing leader whose career reads like a passport full of stamps and a resume full of iconic brands. With almost 20 years of experience, she's led diverse teams and portfolios across the globe, from kids' products to women's and men's categories, just with one goal in mind: driving growth in dynamic, fast moving markets. She spent her career turning bold ideas into brands and not just launch. They last, building sustainable brand development and commercial success engines along the way. Now, what really sets her apart is how she leads. She's deeply passionate about cross functional, cross cultural team leadership, and she's built a reputation for developing high performance teams by leading with kindness and authenticity. Oh my God. That's not something that I get to introduce people with a lot of times, right? So her journey has taken her across multiple geographies in APAC and the UK, with stints in PNG, MediaCom, and now the Lego Group. Please welcome to Middle Manager Mastery, Nitika Nagpal.
Thank you so much, Shruti. Such a pleasure.
Such a pleasure to have you here. All right, Nitika, let's jump right in because when you're talking about kindness and authenticity and leading powerful teams, the very first thing that usually comes up for me for middle managers is delegation, right? And be honest. Sometimes it is so difficult to delegate because deep down, we are just worried, will somebody else be able to do such a good job of it as we want to do it, right? So let me start off with this. What's the one thing you still won't delegate because deep down, you know you're the best at it?
Such a reality for so many of us in every day. I think for me, it's not a task, it's a behavior thing, which I think that leaders are expected to do. One thing that I took time to let go of is the fact that when I have to align and give tasks to somebody else's team or align things between two different leaders, I would stay very close to the process. I lead the alignment, I lead the task, who does what does my team do, and what do they do to the details. And that's a behavior that took me a really long time to sort of step away from. And it felt uncomfortable because as a leader, you're expected to drive alignment, you're expected to manage people's work scope, and also be conscious of the political side, if I can say so, of not stepping on other people's toes and protecting your team, both sides of it. And you feel like you're best suited to do that versus letting it go to the team. Over the year, I realized that's really not our leader's job. Even as middle managers, it is still about setting the task, setting the path, and let the team figure out how do they make the projects come to life. So more often than not, I find myself being very clear of why the teams need to work together, which two individuals are best suited to take up a project together, and then walk away and let them find their own ways of working the best way they would bring it to life, and then come back to us if they have roadblocks versus hovering over them.
So give me an example, Nitika, if you remember any example where it, you know, it struck you that this is how you're not being the best leader.
For me, one of the innovation, like you mentioned, I've enjoyed a lot of my career building ways to do things differently, and doing innovation in marketing or the marketing approach for our team has been quite precious to me. And one of these projects was bringing retail media marketing into our work a couple of years ago, in fact, so it's not even that old. And what I realized that I set up this team of retail media experts coming from different cross functional teams, and I kept leading the team meetings in terms of what is the progress, what is the agenda, how we should set the vision, how they should go about and do the next step before our next regroup. And 6 months into these project meetings, I realized the person who knows the least about what is happening in terms of like deep functional knowledge of retail media as me, because these are actual people who are doing this day in and out. So while my role in that room is to connect them to the organization vision and where our commercial realities need to go, how they bring it to life, I was adding no value except them sitting in the room and reporting back to me and waiting for me to tell me how to work with each other. So a lot of the real work was happening outside the room when they were bringing it to life. That for me was the big unlocker of saying, I don't then need them to find their ways in the room together with me. They can do it outside. We just need to know, is it delivering what we've set it out? And have they gone to the next stage or not? And that's how we streamlined both their responsibility, how they took on reports to the rest of the leadership, but also then starting building their own connection with our global teams where I was no longer the bottleneck.
Interesting. Interesting how you realized that you were actually being the bottleneck. And that is what happens probably with a lot of leaders. When they try to do everything together, they become the bottleneck. Now,
Yes.
let's take a flip side of it, Nitika. Let's take an example, or let's take a situation where, let's say, you have a deadline in 6 days and your people are stretched and you almost want to jump in and do the thing yourself because it'll be faster. So, talk to me how you will talk yourself out of it, or tell me how will you know when your instinct is right to yes, you should jump in, and when you know not to jump in.
Yeah, it's such a common reality for organizations and teams these days because we're all stretched with our work. Everything is complex and matrix, and it does come as a pretty regular reflection point for us as a team and myself as a leader. I think more than the speed, I think I've probably struggled more with the guilt of giving people last minute tasks and
Hmm.
disrupting their own work plan, so to speak. So it's more the guilt side of thing versus the speed side of things. How I have learned to then sort of reconcile is, it's mainly a lever of, is there a learning for my team? So do they, one, learn organization reality and how to operate in a matrix organization? Is there a learning journey in terms of prioritization, and is it a skill set that they need to develop more than what their current work and what they will pull out of that job? If any of these is
Hmm.
yes, I'll let them do that, because it's
Hmm.
also okay to reprioritize when organization needs. They have to learn to do that. If none of this is true, if it's non-value add in some shape or form, and if I have the capacity, then I will take it on. But more often than not, if I evaluate it from those levers of org navigation, skill set, or reprioritization, I'll find the value for the team, and that's how I take it back to them. And
Makes
you
perfect
train
sense.
them on that muscle to then be able to do it themselves.
Yeah. And you basically also tell them your rationale of doing what you're doing so that as they grow into leaders, they can apply this or build
Yeah,
something rational. Makes
true.
perfect sense. Let me ask you this. If you were to compare your 2 year into management person to now, what has changed? How do you delegate now versus then?
Yeah, all of us have our cringe selves that we wouldn't want to rip. I think as many, and I share this with my senior leaders who are ready for sort of middle management things. The biggest jump people have to make from doing things themselves to setting the direction. And within that, the behavior which I found myself stuck into is like, I call it a little bit of helicopter leadership, in the sense that I still did the pieces that I was supposed to do because I enjoyed them. I would set the vision, set the strategy, work with them on what tasks, but then I'll still be around. I'll be sitting in their briefs. I will be just hearing what is in their reviews, what the agency is. And while it created more work, I felt close to the business because I felt like that's what I was supposed to do, still be responsible for the commercial and what the work is happening, even if I wasn't interfering. Two things I realized from there. One, of course, there is an element of time and your team developing their skill set. But for myself, I was walking away from my own visibility and the role as a leader, because the more time I was spending in their work, I wasn't in my leadership team meeting, not building my network to solve future roadblocks for them, building relationships with my peripheral leaders who may not be influencing me directly, but are important for me and my team's work. And I was teaching that behavior to my team as well.
Hmm.
And that was the big realization and bit of feedback that I worked on. And one of the big enablers to then flip on the other side is I coach my team on managing me as a stakeholder
Uh-huh.
versus me being part of their room. So we do set the vision and tasks together, and
Uh-huh.
then I walk away, and it's entirely their responsibility, irrespective of their level of what would they want to see from me. Am I a roadblock remover? Do they want whiteboard sessions with me? Am I the reassurance? And if they want me in the room, I'll be present, if especially if they're junior, just setting out in their career kind of teams. But I let them manage both me as a stakeholder and the business as a result. And they have to convince me where I'm needed versus the other way around. And
Hmm.
that is something that has taken time, of course, to build. But yeah, I feel like I've enabled the team to do that quite a bit.
That's great. And that's such a great way to put it, Nitika. I really liked it. The fact that all the time that you're spending micromanaging and being in the rooms is actually time taken away from the work you should be doing.
Yes.
I really like that. And the other part as well, which is, just use you as a key stakeholder and let the team determine how do they want to leverage you. Because, that sets like real ownership and real accountability without you being helicopter managing them. So
Yes.
that's really cool. Let's change track a little bit because like we talked about that work is changing, we are all stretched thin. The other disruption that's coming for all of us is obviously AI. And very recently there are a bunch of people I've been coaching outside, and some of them are going through situations wherein the companies are merging, they're acquiring a new entity, they are divesting of something, and so there's disruption even outside of AI. And it feels like disruption is something, or change is something which is inevitable any which ways, right? So I'm going to like literally ask you this. If you are in such a situation, right? And if your team asks, are we going to be okay? And you honestly don't know, what do you say?
Ah, eh, as Shruti said it so well, it's irrespective of the culprit or the driver of it. It could be AI, it could be anything else. As just professional in any corporate environment, the change transformation is a reality. And there's a very cute phrase which is very regularly used in the Lego group. I found it very funny the first time I heard it 13 years ago, called flying the plane as we build it. And it's a really nice, it's a very sweet way of putting organization complexity. 13 years later, I still use it every day. So the complexity never goes away. I think for me, when it comes to leading a team through that, I think there is an element of, again, it cannot be a surprise to them that that's the environment they are operating in. So it's not something you do in a moment, in a meeting, at the time of big transformation. It is about consistently and constantly bringing them closer to the way organization operates, how the winds are changing, how people, multiple layers above you, are interacting with the rest of the functions, and bringing that consistent and constant conversation topic to the team needs. Because then what that allows us to do is we feel very close to the pulse of the organization while always bringing back to saying, okay, this is what is happening. Here are the controllables. This is what we are working. This is just for your information. It's not impacting us right now, but maybe a few years down the line it would. We feel a lot more closer as a team to the organization. We feel a little bit more aware of what's happening around us, and the understanding that not every lever will be controllable for us, but also when change drops, we don't feel helpless because we don't control everything. Because especially as a middle management team layer, you are the receiver of change more often than not versus driver of it. And then how do you reconcile the work part of it? So that's from a team operating point of view. The other thing which I invest quite a bit with my team, which kind of anchors, is what is the role and the skill set.
Hmm.
So, and especially I'm a little bit lucky in marketing, in that respect, that at the end of the day, we are serving the consumers and shoppers outside this office
Hmm.
and not the people internally. Broadly, that's the mindset that I live with my team. So irrespective of whatever happens and the titles or the lines in our job scopes. The consumers and shoppers are the ones that we are serving and skills that we are developing as humans. So we always anchor back to saying, does that change? How does that change? And that nobody else knows better than us, because we are the last mile between the organization and the consumer. So that brings a sense of different lens of ownership and control, which
Hmm.
is quite unique to our team. So I spend energy in those two, so that when changes drop, they're not unmoved.
Hmm. So then, help us with an example or a situation you've been in, Nitika, where you had to convey something, you had to stand in front of your team and deliver some news. And I understand that you said that bring them along, it just doesn't drop one day. But definitely there must have been some reorg situation that you might have faced or something that had happened which you had to communicate to the team, right? And so what did you actually say? What happened? What was the reaction?
Yeah, in fact, happened a few months ago. We are going through an organization transformation, and we had to bring that update to the team. I think typically where I have structured this is into three sections of a conversation, and that's how I prepare for it. I give the organization side of the download for this change. So that's what we did. We said, here is the change which is coming. Here are the drivers for it as we have been informed so far. This is what we know in terms of what is going to come to life, approximate timelines, but we know organization transformations could take time. Here is what you are expected to do in the meantime. Stop there. That's the organization side of the story. Then the second beat I add is, what is my interpretation of it in terms of impact to the team or impact to our immediate business. So then we go through, here is what it might mean to us in the short term. Here is what I am feeling about it. Here is what the leadership is thinking about it. So here is my perspective on this role. And then the third bit of it is, shut up and listen, which is, let the team reflect. There would always be people in the room who are verbal thinkers,
Yeah,
who would actually sometimes, if they're positive voices, will take the rest of the team along on that journey, which can be quite powerful in these kind of, just because they'll jump into questions, they'll work it out with you, and they'll get the quieter ones on the same page. But the other thing which is bring back that loop of conversations then again in one-on-ones and then in team meetings. So what I'll do is, the third phase gets extended. We do it in the room, but we close shop, because I also don't want a lot of speculation to trigger from there. I give people time, and then we come back and say, okay, what are you thinking in one-on-ones? What are your areas of concerns? How would you deal with it? And then we are back in a team meeting saying, by the way, these are things, these are FAQs which have come up, these are concerns which we are sitting with, this is how we will navigate, and this is what I will take back to the leadership as things that we want to know more about. So keeping then that, the third phase, almost as a consistent loop till the next organization update drops, is a behavior which is quite helped in these situations, or is
got it.
helping now as we're going through it.
Yeah, and that is something that I've heard in other organizations with other leaders as well, that it's really sometimes alleviating the fears in your one on ones and continuing and keeping that open door. So, there was one who we were discussing, and I was like, yeah, just have an office hours every week. Like, have those 30 minutes where anybody in your entire organization, he leads like 200 plus people, like anybody in that organization can just walk into your room and can ask you and share what they're feeling. So let me ask you this, if you can share, which is, if confidentiality allows, what were one or two concerns that came up that you all decided as leadership to then address formally?
Mm. I think you would think in org transformation, one of the most common ones is, does it impact my progression?
Yeah,
So so that is something that we proactively try to anticipate and ask for clarification on, because these organization transformations typically come with like a role freeze or a hiring freeze. And as you very rightly probably guessed, the second part of your question, we didn't get an answer from our leaders in terms of the team who's leading it, saying, what do we do about it? Their thing was, hold on, we'll tell you in a few weeks, which we knew could be a couple of months till they tell us what happens. For us, that was a differentiating point. Like, it was a very clear team need, but was not something that we would be told what the right official line on this one is. So that's the part that we actually went in with our leadership opinion. Not to say that we could change people's roles or their progression, but we actually went and told them that we will not be able to do that in the next 4 3 months. And the reason, while it's not great news to deliver, for us, what we didn't want to layer on in a organization transformation situation is false hope.
Yeah.
That your progression is not going to get impacted. You'll still get all the role changes. You'll still get promoted, because we couldn't promise that. So we decided to, even it meant erring on the side of possibly negative news for some of them, just holding the line, saying, in our team, this is what we hold on to. And if anything positive comes, it will be taken up better. So yeah, I think role progression is a hard one always.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some cases, it's not even progression. In some cases, it's will my role exist? Like, I'll give you an example. There, I do a bunch of EQ, emotional intelligence workshops at a bunch of like AWS clients and such. And many times the question that come up is, well, AI is changing everything so drastically. I don't know if my role is going to exist 6 months from now. Why should I be focused on building these skill sets? Like, that's a tough one. How do you answer that? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's very fascinating, this kind of thinking. And I have usually found this is perfect opportunity for those coaching mindset, which I think you would probably teach me than me telling you, versus managing, because this is where I put my best. But why hat to people? Like, why do you think AI could take your particular job? Okay, if this is how you define your skill set, is that all you are doing? What is the value? If it is genuine, what is in your control? What could you change? So this is a wonderful opportunity to make people be in control of their own skill planning and what we call internally development,
Yeah.
IDPs, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's such a interesting way, because you take the power from organization or a monster outside to the individual, and it's a hard one to do, and these situations actually force people to invest energy behind that. So to me, while these are the hardest, these are the most fun conversations, because I don't have to do the thinking. I tell people to do the thinking. I just ask questions.
Yeah, and you so rightly said it, Nitika, that yes, these are the most ripe situations for those coaching conversations. I would sometimes even go to the extent and tell them, okay, so suppose 6 months down the line, you will not have this role. Totally okay. What can you do in these 6 months that you can leverage for the rest of your career, for the next role
Absolutely.
you take? Like, how can you make the most of it? By
Yes.
sitting around is not the answer for
Not gonna change.
sure.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So then the last one on this that I want to just ask, and that one again is something that came up a bunch of times. There was some time when I was doing something on authentic leadership, and somebody just asked, so are you asking me to be just transparent? And I was like, no, authentic leadership is not just be transparent about
Everything.
everything.
Yeah.
Right? So you tell me, what's your view on how do you draw the line between being honest and being oversharing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all learn through it in time. I wouldn't be so naive to admit, like, I've never overshared, or I've never walked into a room playing like, oh, playing people's buddy, and then suddenly you're like, oh shit, have I just panicked everybody? And yes, I have. And then you're backpedaling, saying, no, but that's actually not going to happen. The house is not on fire. I was just frustrated. Learn through those situations as well. I think where I draw the line is almost in my mind, there is a sense of, if it's how I am dealing with a situation, which is my own approach to developing EQ, I'll share. So,
Hmm.
what is my perspective? How am I dealing with it? Am I happy or not happy about it? That's fine, because that's me as an individual. If it's a conversation which will help them understand what's happening in the organization around them,
Hmm.
and it may not all be positive, but actual complexities that you need to deal with, also I will share. Where
Hmm.
I draw the line and I stop is where it goes down into, I almost call it the circle of wallowing, right? Come, let's hold hand around and cry about how bad it is and how somebody else didn't do what they were supposed to do. So your work is late. Where it gets to getting judgmental about other people's job, their
Hmm.
quality of work, where it's about just focusing on the negative, that's where the ship kind of goes down. And
Yeah.
a lot of situations, you're almost like there is a certain kind of like heroism in going down with the ship. That's where you stop, where you're going down with the ship. You need to
Hmm.
be in, as they say, Amundsen, who brought everybody back from South Pole in his crew, didn't leave anybody behind. He didn't go down with the ship. That's what you need to do as a leader. You need to bring everybody back, no matter how hard it might be. And I think that to me is the line where it's about teaching them about the organization or managing self. It's okay to be authentic. When it's about criticism, negative loops, outside the sphere of your control, that's where you stop and pull the brakes.
Hmm. Very well said. Very well said. And yeah, I think it's also because what you said right in the beginning, which is sometimes oversharing can just lead to more panic because you don't have all the answers. They don't know what to expect. And then suddenly, instead of allaying the fears, you've just done the opposite. So,
Yes,
yeah, there's a big reason why, you may want to think about how much are you sharing as well. Um,
absolutely.
have you ever been and walked through such a situation where where you had to really boost up your team's morale? And it could be the recent situation that, you guys were facing or something else from earlier in your career. Or
Yeah,
maybe you were on the side of the team that needed the morale boosting and your
yeah,
leader did a great job
yeah.
either.
There was a very interesting situation a few years back where, in that context of receiving information or update from our global colleagues, we received a campaign playbook which we felt would land really badly in the business or in our market. And we were very convinced it's the wrong thing to do. Now, that's it was an interesting situation because not because the work was hard to do and we had to convince the global organization why it's not the right thing. The more layers we peeled, the more we found out that the global team has actually doubled down and they're really clear that this is what they want to do and they want us to follow through, which meant that the
Hmm.
team not just felt that they have to do something that they don't like and it's not right. They have to be doing it because somebody else is telling them to do, not because
Hmm.
I want them to do. The other part of the story, which then they had already seen through these rounds of conversation, was they had seen that I wasn't aligned to the global vision, which meant I am in a position where they know that I am not aligned to the strategy which the organization is telling us, but as a team, we will still have to do it because that's the mandate. Now, we could have walked away from it with a very, this is how things are in a corporate world and I'm helpless kind of a situation. We somehow in my brain that flipped into a really funny setup. And I'll tell you how it happened. I think just from a conversation perspective, like I brought it to the team one day as like this chess game that I'm losing. And like every piece is a gameplay in an organization navigation piece. And I was like, at the end of the day, the game doesn't matter, right? Like we're still selling what we're selling. We'll do fine as a business. But this is now a chess game that we're learning through the organization where how do you disagree and commit? Which are people you need to convince? Who we could have said what would they have agreed or not? What did we tell them? What was the question? Did they agree or not? And laid bare the entire process to them as a little bit of a chess game, which made it super funny for them. So while they were bringing this to life on a project that they weren't agreeing to, they suddenly disassociated from the execution, but got
Hmm.
tuned heavily into, ooh, this is how decisions are made into the organization. If I had to influence it, these are the people I should have reached earlier. If I was doing it differently, these are the guys I would have already built a relationship with. This is where authentically Nitika failed. I might have ways of approaching it, or could have she should have asked somebody else for help, right? They saw the whole mechanics behind approaching it. And to me, that was one of those ways of situations which were just not right, but we went through the motions but found the best learning out of it together as a team. Yeah. And this year we're doing really well on that topic. So it was a few years ago, but I think just like where we've reached as a team and how they're able to then solve these things themselves even without reaching me is quite a bit of a journey.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Because, when you cannot influence something, at least take away the best you can from it. And I think that's what it sounds like you all did. And it's intriguing to me because, it would be obviously very morale downer for people when they have to do something which they don't agree and their leader doesn't agree. But converting it into something, now that's it done. So don't think about that, but think about what can you take away, and in a fun way like you did, I think is interesting. Um, and I guess then the lesson out of this is really that sometimes you don't have to, just like you had said, we don't have to hold hands and wallow in the circle of sorrow, but rather, how do I uplift you all up from whatever this is? One thing I'm just curious about is, at the end of the day, when you guys did use the playbook, do you think it ended up being whatever you would have wanted it to or not?
So, two parts to it. Everything that we said would go wrong in the market if we brought it to life did go wrong in the market, which is great. So we had a little bit of a I told you so
Told you so.
moment without which again, if I was somebody who was very precious about organization more than the consumer, I would have been very happy about it. But from a consumer's perspective, it didn't land well, right? Now, um, thankfully, the other part of the story is with the chess game, we also built a plan B. So
Mhm,
we managed the global campaign coming to life in only certain parts of our business.
mhm,
And we did have a plan B, which we got approved through our local leadership, which kind of cushioned the blow. So for us, from a consumer and commercial perspective, we actually delivered a fairly successful campaign while we knew it took a bit of a hit on our consumer connection or consumer awareness, which is where we had the big point of differentiation with our global team saying it won't land well. It didn't land well, but we still made the numbers. So, and hence it gives us the chance to, in future years,
hmm.
go with what is
Influence.
right, influence better.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if we would have lost both consumers and commercial, then we would have still been in that cycle of being told what to do.
That's great. And I think that for me is like literally the biggest learning. The development of Plan B. So you boosted the morale enough that the team was invested in developing a Plan B. And then that cushioned the blow. And that gave you the future, I would almost call credit to actually have that influence with the global team. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Okay. And then, of course, a leader, whenever I think about a middle manager or a leader of, people, there are these multiple elements to it, a few that we talked about. So, how do you keep the morale going, landing a difficult news, delegation? The other element to it is also strategic thinking, because, like you said, and you were referring to, how delegating and micromanaging is taking away from the work that I should be doing, which is really around the strategic thinking. So let's jump to that a little bit there, right? When you think about strategic thinking, I feel one thing is that lots of time people are just told, you've been told to be more strategic. Nobody tells you what exactly does being more strategic means. So tell us your version. What does that mean for you?
Shruti, such a fab question because I'll use slightly more politically correct language here, but like strategies is like AI. You plug it in any sentence, everybody feels like this person must know more than they do. And very openly, in more and more, I mean, I've been with the current organization for a while, but I can testify this across. The more matrix we are as an organization, any company, then everybody and their uncle is doing strategy in a company, right down to the like in my case, again, from a marketing lens, an associate brand manager or an intern in their development plan would put strategy. And I'm like, What do you want to do? Strategy is a plan you set and you leave it for 3 years, okay? Don't touch it. It's such a fab question because it's just also in every LinkedIn post, in every job description that we want people to be strategic. Yeah, the way I peel the layers is no matter what the organization feel they define it as strategic thinking. It is basically, do you have a game plan of what you are doing in the role that you are? Then you're being strategic. If you don't have a game plan, you don't. Game plan at each level and each individual will look very different, and that's what we invest behind. So yes, should you all have strategy in your learning plans and in your job? Sure, because that's what corporate world is teaching us. But strategy for you and me would look very different. For example, in frontline commercial setups like ours, you are responsible for go to market strategy. You are taking what the direction which is being set by the organization and bringing it to life. You are the last mile before the consumer. Don't be strategic about global. For global team, for them, be set the direction where the organization needs to head to. What are the product and the consumer realities? That is the strategic truth of the role that you are in. Do not come and tell us how does it come to life in our stores, for example. So I am fine with strategy being bastardized in every context as long as it's being used with a game plan mindset. And then I split it down even with the team in terms of, if you're a business director, you are designing strategy for how it compares to rest of the business, not your area of your portfolio. Your next in command should be deciding the strategy for your portfolio because you should be doing total business piece. And from there, they are setting strategy or game plan for what is happening in the next 12 months and how is the best, most effective way of doing that. So for me, call it this one point of defeat. I have stopped fighting using strategy everywhere because it looks nice, but I am ruthless in defining what it is for each individual that I deal with. And it's more often than not, it's a game plan for the next piece of work that they're doing.
That's great. And I like also the element of remit. Like, what's in your remit, and hence, for what are you designing the game plan?
This,
Be very, very clear about
yeah,
that too. Think
absolutely.
very, very
Absolutely.
well said. Tell me then, has it ever happened with you that, you developed a game plan for something that felt like, yeah, this makes sense for the next 6 months, but then comes the 12th month or the 18th month or 2 year mark, and you're like, shoot, no, this was a very, very wrong plan. We shouldn't have made it like this. Has ever that happened?
Uh, do I really have to tell you? No, I think hindsight for everybody is 2020 in that respect, right? So
Yeah.
I think, like, I'll share an example for me. Actually, one of the first projects that I worked on, we were launching a new product. I was not senior enough to be designing the launch plan, but I was the one who was bringing it to life. But as you do at that early career stages, right? Really bought into, I've been told this plan, I'll bring it to life, everything would be perfect, and I'll work really hard. What an amazing career opportunity. Everything that could go wrong on that plan went wrong in terms of bringing it to life. The copy didn't get approved from the censor boards, media plans didn't go on time. When we launched the product, the sales didn't come, everything that could go wrong. So suddenly, even when you're part of bringing something fab to life, you see it fail in front of your own eyes in that respect. What I loved in that scenario, though, is my leaders actually almost redirecting my attention to understanding the fundamentals of the business and going on that path and exploring it. So while I wasn't the one who set the plan, I was the one who inherited the results of it and was blessed enough to then be able to take the ownership of investigating where things went right or wrong, which was a huge opportunity so early in your career. I went to the consumers and spoke to them. We went to the retailers, looked at the commercial plan, looked at the category, and figured out some of the fundamental assumptions in the plan when we were making it versus when 12 months later it came to life and 6 months later where we were evaluating where things had deviated and then figure out how we were going to course correct from it. So while not a strategy that I had designed, I think just the ability to get that freedom to investigate where it went wrong and then what could have been different points was one of the biggest privileges of my career, to learn through that failure. And interestingly enough, I don't have a turnaround story attached to it. That is another
Hmm.
such an, I still call it an early career blessing, because I don't have a story to tell you saying, and hence I figured out what the issues were and then we turned it around and the business flew. No,
That didn't happen.
we actually discovered that the proposition no longer held valid in the markets. 6 months down the line, we shut the plant and we shut the proposition and it was taken off the market because it just didn't have the runway left in it. And whatever had gone into the business case assumptions were not the market realities. The market dynamics of that category had just moved that fast that we didn't anticipate it. So I don't have a story in the sense of like this magical turnaround, but like a really important decision that the business had to take, stop doing something which they felt very passionate about and they invested all this energy just because it no longer was the right thing to do.
And that exactly is what strategy is all about, if you think about it, right?
Yes.
Whether you should even be playing in a space, that is what strategy is.
Yes,
So, yeah, I
absolutely.
mean, at the end of the day, it helped you all to take the right decision, which is exactly what it was meant to do. So, while, like you're saying, it's not a great turnaround story, I hear you, but
Yeah,
it is a great story nevertheless.
exactly. Like, and that's why I still call these a privilege to experience that versus this big success as it is typically called, like market share gains, business turnaround, unlocking a new category. One of the first projects I worked on failed, 18 months down, shut down, so to speak. Nothing to do with me, I must say. On the
Okay.
record, it wasn't me, it was somebody else.
All right, we won't pin it down on you, Nitika. Which one was it, if you don't mind me asking?
Uh, there was a line of diapers that Pampers had launched called Magic Knicker, only launched in India and China. It was the CEO's pet project. The intent was to launch a lower cost, very high quality proposition into developing markets to really drive category conversion. By the time that formulation and product line had come into the market, our mid tier had actually done a much better job than anticipated on market penetration. So we didn't need a low tier product, which was even more difficult to sell because our mid tier was a really good both price value and
Mm-hmm.
perception, especially in
Mm-hmm.
perception conscious markets like Asia. So it was a massive learning that in 18 months, our price value and category development went so fast that we didn't need a low tier unlocker. We could lead with the mid tier product.
Interesting. I would have wanted to ask you a question, but you already answered it already in this example where people genuinely like something, but you had to shut it down. And it was not just you in this case. It feels like it was basically a decision that you all took. And which is totally fair. That's what business strategy should be about. As a leader, even as a middle manager, because you're doing both the execution and thinking at the same time, the one concern I've heard very, very often is I don't have time to just step back and think and do my strategic thinking, if you will. I know we've bastardized that word so much.
No, I'm sorry to spoil it for you as well, but we'll look very profesh by using it many
I
times.
know. I know. And guess what? I took all myself financial strategy lead. I thought should shut up. So, but jokes apart. But jokes apart, no, seriously. So I hear people say that a lot, or partly I, what you alluded to, which is why it stuck with me so much, is because when you're so busy doing micromanagement, how are you going to get time to do all of this, to build the relationships where needed, etc.? Is there anything else that you do, to carve that time out on your schedule? Anything that you could share?
Things I would share, and they sound super simple, but the more people have mentioned it, not a lot of people use this. Outlook has a function which blocks focus time for you for the next week automatically, which I am surprised by how less people know and how effective that is, because that's how you train the organization and yourself that that's your time to think through things. So I have been using that quite religiously as focus time, as thinking time for myself. Of course, there's a certain flex. My team knows when to approach it, but I do hold it quite close to myself. The one tweak that I make to that session is usually on a Friday afternoon, and I'm most effective on a Friday afternoon because I'm doing these kind of like game planning for next couple of weeks, not strategy for the next couple of weeks. So I would put the topic that I want to think through or work through in that time. So what are my deliverables for the next quarter? In that respect, what do I need to get going on? What do I want to think about in the next couple of weeks? These meetings are now blocked for that topic because that gives me, it's not generic focus, it's not for somebody to block. It actually does say plan for XYZ meeting or this output, and
Hmm.
which then allows people to also hold that time respectably. So I do protect that quite often. The other bit over the years I've learned is I have learned my thinking style and my working style quite well, and I'm very transparent with my team about it so that they manage around it. For example, I am not a very early morning person, but I do my best thinking in the afternoons. So I would do a lot of one on ones in the morning because that's my team time, that's my time to be in meetings. My time is in the afternoons. I am equally precious about no Friday meetings for the team because that's also my thinking time and planning time. So for them, I push this as it's not your meeting time, it's your learning time if you're not doing thinking. So there are certain things that I have learned about the way that I work, which I have also made common knowledge to my team around it so that they also help me enable that. Similarly, I am a very visual thinker, and sometimes understanding that I need to make the slide and it needs to look pretty before my story fills is very different from how my colleagues do it, who would write everything down and it's a story and then they make it pretty. And that's not how I operate, and there's no right or wrong way. But as long as we know, we will come at it differently. My slides would be ready before my thinking is watertight, and their slides would look shit, but we would build that together. Is again just knowing how you learn, how you deliver, and then making sure your closest team is aware of it so that they enable it is are the two things I do to sort of just protect that thinking deliveries.
That's fantastic, Natika. I'm going to throw a wrench in there. When we are a little bit senior, it's easier for us to do the time protection. Where I find most people struggling with it is when they are in their early stages of being people managers, let's say, right? The first time people managers, the first time manager of managers, because their time is not necessarily so much their time. They also get a lot of fires they need to douse at the same time. Are there things that you successfully were able to do then? And is there any of that that you've continued to do now too?
I think it's one of those reflections that I was sharing earlier. I think being aware of what is your sphere of control and what is right for the stage that you are in. Like,
Mm,
I think what sometimes people mistake is that when you're a new manager, you suddenly need to be operating at the same level as somebody else who has the same title, but maybe 6, 7, 8 years of doing that job. Because now your title looks the same and you sit on the same table in the same leadership team. And I think to me, thankfully, I had a couple of mentors who really stopped me from doing that, saying,
mm,
yes, you have a very steep learning curve, but don't think that you will not have the learning curve and you'll suddenly operate at that level. So there are behaviors you need to let go, but also being comfortable that when you are in early stages, you are still building network, you're getting to know your team, you're getting to know how the organization expects you to deliver. So it's okay to invest that time initially for a limited window in the operational side of the business to both build your confidence, your team's confidence, and your leadership's confidence that you are in control of the area that you're responsible for. And then comes the jumping off point of saying, if you've done that and you've given yourself that grace, which is a phrase I use quite often, give yourself that grace and then jump off from there.
mm.
Because staying in that space is what is detrimental. Acknowledging that you need that time in your career to hold on to a certain place is not, at least in my books.
Yes, and I would totally, totally agree to that. That's where I like also about the other thing that you said. self awareness about how do you think best, how do you work best, and communicating that to other people so your team can enable you, like you said in it.
I think there is one thing which I've realized, which again I try to tell my team, especially if they want to jump into, if they want to go from that senior manager into the first time leader of business kind of situation, right? The biggest thing that they need to do is don't try to short circuit the learning phase of it, because you would trick yourself into thinking that you're operating at that level without understanding what the room is expecting out of you, and you will trick yourself into sort of stumbling, either hitting readiness challenge or start breaking your confidence, which you've worked really hard to build because you're such a good executor. So I think just giving them that grace of saying, yes, you would have a learning curve, know the room that you're playing in and be clear of your learning curve versus pretending it's not there, is possibly the best service you can do to actually jump to the next level.
Very, very well said. And so, if I were to ask you, I know we just have about 3 minutes, any parting thoughts for people listening in?
um, I think where I started, there's something that somebody said to me many years ago. It has become a little bit of a motto, but a little bit of a joke, running joke. But cause good trouble is really something that I stand for. And it's a little bit of a personal equity, but I think as leaders, it's a really important one to know where and to push and pull both your team, but also the system against what is the direction that you're setting, and being comfortable with the equity of you're causing good trouble in the sense you're pushing and pulling against the system, you're helping the organization and the team grow, and you are okay to take some risks, is such an important thing as leaders to do versus doing things what the organization expects you to do, because you all shape the role into what it can be versus where it was. So cause good trouble. And the other one is just be aware of the leadership signals. Leaders do cast long shadows, everything leaves a signal, so be kind.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nitika, for this wonderful, wonderful chat and the
Thanks, Shruti.
amazing parting message. And to the listeners, once again, this was Nitika Nagpal, who serves as Brand Marketing Director for UK and the Ireland business in Lego. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shruti, such a pleasure.